It's a wonderful time of the year, right? I love Christmas season. It seems like everything is just different. Last night, for those of you who did come out to the tree lighting, fantastic. I think the only thing that would have put it over the edge if it would have been just a little bit of snow coming down. But outside of that, it was a wonderful, wonderful evening. It's about the only time of the year I like cold weather. You know, so like after January, like we could get back up to 60s and 70s and flip-flops and shorts. But for right now, I love the Christmas season. I think everything is just amping up for the week. Anna's going to be home. My daughter's going to be home from college. There's no schoolwork. Everything is just going to kind of take a break during that time where we get to be able to spend time with family. The joy of giving presents, like we've bought some already, and just with the anticipation to see the kids' response and those that we love when we get it. But I think Christmas also amplifies some of the disappointments that we've experienced in life. It's a time of stress and of busyness, looking towards deadlines that we have to get done. Everything has to be just right because we want to capture those moments. I think it amplifies pain of loss that we've experienced, not just this year, but in the years to come. I think also Christmas serves as a reminder of failed expectations. Things that we thought were going to be aren't, and for some reason at Christmas it just comes up to the surface. I think that's also complicated because of the world that we live in. It seems like our times right now, there's just this perpetual turmoil where we look at the world and we just see in living color right in front of us every day the suffering that's all around the world. The deep division, the fractures that we're seeing not only around the world, but in our country, in our land. It seems like every day you turn on the news or look at your news feed and you realize that there's another scandal that is breaking today that seems worse than the one that broke yesterday. I think with everything here, it's hard to know what we can trust. Do you know what the 2016 Oxford Dictionary word of the year was? Post-truth. And this is how it's defined: relating to our denoting of circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than the appeals to emotions and personal belief. Hashtag fake news. You know, as I reflect on this, the image that I have of our society that I think creeps into our personal worlds is like that we're in this dark room trapped. And we have to figure out how to get out or how to get some light in this room. And the normal things that we would try to grab onto to give some stability in this upside down world, we can't find them because everything seems to be just either dark or fuzzy. I wish there was a sense that we could just call a timeout, right? Just like timeout and everything stops. That we do the Control-Alt-Delete and everything just kind of just closes. And then if everything stopped, then we can just kind of reorient our lives to what we knew was right or what we wishes were be right. So here's the question that I want us to wrestle with as we start this Advent season. How do we find our way out of this darkness? How do we find ourselves out of this path of gloom? The next several weeks as we go into Advent, we're going to be looking at the ancient text, actually just one verse in Isaiah. Where Isaiah was a prophet, and his whole purpose was to warn God's people and call them to a place of repentance. But what I like about Isaiah the prophet is not only does he give a stark warning to say it's time to turn around and repent and move back towards God, he does it, but he also brings about a message of hope. And so to set the context of what we're going to be doing and what verse that we're going to be looking at, I want us to understand what's going on in Israel at this time. See, internally, Israel has walked away from God. They have abandoned all of Jesus' teachings. They've turned their backs on him, and they've adapted their own way of doing things. They understand tradition, and so they kind of have one foot step in tradition, but for the most part, they're doing what they want to do, what feeds their appetites, what makes them feel a sense of fulfillment. And honestly, if you read through that, it is an absolute mess. Similar to what I believe is happening in our society today. And then to add on to that, there's an external threat. The Assyrians are ready to take over both Israel and Judah. They were advancing and slowly pushing towards the borders. So not only is there this internal mess that's going on, there's an external force that is pushing in. And as we read through Isaiah, we do know that the Assyrians do come and they capture both Israel and Judah. You see, darkness and gloom and this sense of anxiety was welling up from within, and the pressure from outside was pushing in. And see, when we walk in this area of darkness and gloom, when it overtakes the land, it leads to this hopelessness, and it robs us of joy. The last several weeks, that's where we landed in the book of Philippians, to say, how do we live our life in the midst of everything that's going around? How do we live and maintain this sense of joy in our lives? In times of darkness, distress, disorientation, both personally and in our society, where do we turn? We see in Isaiah chapter 8, as this continues to build, that they turn not to good places. In fact, it starts here. It says, when someone tells you to counsel mediums and spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not people inquire of their God? So there was this desperateness of the people of Israel, that they were not only trying to find out maybe what God was saying, but they were consulting the dead. And Isaiah is saying, come back. He gives them this warning: consult God's instructions and the testimony of warning. If anyone does not speak according to this word, they have no light of dawn. Distressed, and then he goes on to explain the internal thing that's happening here. He says, distressed and hungry, they roam throughout the land when they are famished. They will become estranged and look upward. They will curse their king and their God. In this room of darkness, trying to walk around, finding any way out or a light switch, like that's the image that I keep getting. Then they will look towards the earth, and they will see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. You see, in distress, we have a choice. Do we lean and move towards hope, or do we keep tripping around and stumbling over and over again in this darkness and gloom? But here's what I like about Isaiah. And if you've heard me preach for a while, we always make this turn. Because in Scripture, as Isaiah says here, there's always, always, always good news. Darkness and gloom can overrun our lives, but there's good news. And Isaiah goes into this in chapter 9. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of darkness, a light has dawned. See, this is the good news. This is the message of Christmas, that those who are walking in this darkness and this gloom, that are tripping over and looking for some sort of hope, but Jesus said, or what Isaiah is saying here, in that deep darkness, a light is dawning. The light is the good news of Jesus. He goes on and he paints this picture of Zebulun and Naphtali. And that is the place where the Assyrians actually walked in. And that was the first land that they conquered. Great pain. Great pain that the Israelites had when they saw this invading country coming in and overtaking their land. But it was also the first place where the great light was revealed. Because in that same place, Zebulun, Naphtali, Galilee, the way by the Jordan, that's where the Messiah, Jesus, was born. Oftentimes, it's in the greatest places of our pain that brings out the brightest points of light. We hold on to the hope because in the midst of the darkness and distress, there's this promise of joy. Isaiah goes on and he says that you have enlarged the nations and increased their joy. And then he uses this word rejoice twice. They rejoice before you as the people rejoice at the harvest, and the warriors rejoice when the dividing of the plunder. You see, Jesus, that light, he's the one that brings the joy. They're talking here about this idea of a farmer. You know, a farmer where it goes through the toil and the agony of fixing the soil, of pulling the weeds. One of the things that I absolutely love is springtime, where everything comes to light. You could go from sitting inside and you can actually enjoy outside and nature and fire pit and all of those great things, but what I hate doing is getting the yard ready for summertime. Like I hate raking the leaves that blew out that we didn't get here in the fall. I hate going into the flower bed and pulling all of the weeds and putting the mulch down and doing all of those things. I hate doing that. You know what drives me to do that? Is to know what's going to be at the end. That once it's all done, I can sit on the patio. I can enjoy time with family and with friends and see the beauty that came out of it. I go through that pain, that work, so that I can enjoy it at the end. That's the same image that he has of the soldiers who go to battle and they work hard, they train, they fight, and then at the end, they rejoice as they take the plunder of the land. That's the type of joy that they're talking about here. Looking forward, in the midst of the hard work, looking forward to see what God has in store and the promises that he has for you. And what he's saying here is don't give up. In the midst of the darkness and all of this stuff that's going down, don't give up. Don't lose hope. And then he sets this stage because he's looking forward to a future plunder, a future harvest. But he says, don't give up, because here, I want to remind you of what I've done in the past. And he goes on and he says this, for as in the days of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, and the bars across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressors. You see, freedom is possible because of that light, because of what Jesus says. He goes, I'm going to destroy those that keep you in bondage. And he does so because he reminds them of a story that they all knew of what took place in Midian. You see, Midian was the place of one of the greatest battles that the Israelites won. But they won it in a different way. You see, the Israelite army, they start out with Gideon, and there are 32,000 soldiers. And God speaks very clearly to Gideon before he goes in battle against the Midianites, and he says, that's too many. Narrow it down. And so Gideon says, anyone who wants to leave, go. You're free to go. And he moves down to 10,000. And Gideon goes to God and says, is this enough? Is this good? Now we can go up against our enemies? And he says, still too many. And he does the test of how they drink their water. And he narrows it down. And there's 300 people left to go to battle against the Midianites. And they won. 300 won. You know why God did all of that? Because he did not want the Israelites to look and say, this is something that I did, that we did this. Our might destroyed the enemy. He wanted them to all know that it was God. That God's the one that destroyed all of them. And so what he is doing here, Isaiah, is he's tying this back to the past. Because God worked in the past and showed up in these miraculous ways that brought freedom, we can have hope because he said he would do it again. You see, we can have this element of hope, this element of joy, This knowledge that what we're in is not going to be the way it always is. You know why? Because he casts us and says, I want you to look ahead to the promises that I have for you, and you can know that those are going to remain true by looking in the past to see how God has worked in the past. We have hope because the battle has been won. He goes on to say in chapter 5, every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destroyed for burning. It will be fuel for the fire. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine when you give yourself to this battle, and finally, you know the battle's over. Not just the battle, but the war. And you fought so hard. And the thought of keep going is fleeting because you know that you've already won. Can you imagine that joy? Of taking those battle garments, the weapons that you use, the clothes that you wear, and heaping them on a fire and burning them up to know that we're never going to have to fight this battle again. I think of the image of New York City with the ticker tape parade at the end of World War II, the war to end all wars. But this one's different. This one ends everything. And then we get into this. It's the irony of the text. It's the climax of this where it's saying, is this even possible? And then Isaiah goes in and he says, here's the solution. And it's this juxtaposition of war and a tiny little baby. You see, this light, the light of joy, the light of hope, of peace, came through this baby that we celebrate during Advent. Verse 6 and 7. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He reigns supreme over them. He is the foundation, and he will be called Mighty, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. So how do we receive this? How do we walk into this? How do we experience this joy, this peace, this hope, this idea of righteousness and justice? How do we walk in the light so that we don't have to trip over ourselves in the darkness and gloom? And he, Jesus, will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The first word that he gives here is that Jesus will be called Wonderful Counselor. You see, when we live in this dark land, when we are experiencing this disorientation of our lives, we have to look for someone or something outside of ourselves to offer clarity, to offer hope, to offer purpose, to offer direction. And it's Jesus, the Wonderful Counselor. A few years back, our family walked through a season of pain, of darkness, of feeling a sense of being trapped with some circumstances that took place in our life. We hit that crisis point where we realized what we have and the resources that we have as a family are insufficient to be able to address the problem that was coming and overwhelming us as a family. And so we went to a counselor. I'll tell you what, Tuesday nights, it was like that anchor We felt like our counselor, her name was Shelley, felt like she was giving us pointers and things that we could grasp on. We feel like for a night, like she didn't turn the light on, but she felt like she brought us to a place where she had a lamp and she was walking us through, asking us questions, challenging us, speaking life into us, giving us hope that says that what we feel is trapped, it doesn't have to end this way, that there is hope. We're indebted to her because we didn't have the resources in ourselves. In that trapped, dark, gloomy, overwhelmed, distressed, turbulent feeling in our lives, we started to see more hope. We started to see more light. There were times where we said, like, can you come home with us? Can we call you? Like, we didn't want to be that client like on the movie What About Bob? You know, like, baby steps, dog. Baby steps, baby steps. But there were times where we felt like, man, Shelley, what do we do? See, that's what Jesus is saying here. Isaiah is saying here about Jesus. Is this baby who we celebrated Advent. He's a wonderful, wonderful counselor. That word wonderful there, it's not a good English translation. Actually, either wonderful or counselor. It just does not translate well into English. It almost means that wonderful is almost like miraculous. The best way or phrase here is an adjective that means which requires God as its explanation. Not the activity of God, but God himself. It was like that. It was that wonderful defeat that the Israelites had at Midian and with Gideon. That it was God's activity. It wasn't just what he did, it was God and attributed to him. And then he goes on in this idea of counselor. Jesus uses a similar word in John chapter 14, where he's meeting with his disciples and he's getting ready for his death on the cross. And he says that I'm going away. I'm going to leave you. I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to be the light of the world that you're going to have with me in flesh and blood. I'm going to die. I'll rise again. But I'm going to send you someone. I'm going to send you an advocate, a counselor. The word that he uses there is the Greek word parakle, not parakeet, parakle. And that word, the word is almost like a diamond. You know how you have a diamond and a beautiful diamond, the way it's cut, it captures the light, and every time you look at it from a different angle, it reflects light, and you have a different image of what the beauty of that. That's like the word, paraclete. Sometimes it's translated as a comforter. That the Spirit, that Jesus is this comforter, that he completely understands the situation that you find yourself in. He understands it, not just because he created the world, but as we celebrate here now, he came into the world. I love what Hebrews says, is that we don't have a high priest who is not able to emphasize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, who's experienced everything that we've experienced, yet did it without sin. So he can remain light in the midst of all of the darkness and gloom that we walk through. You see, the high priest was the one that represented the people to God and God to the people, and that is Jesus. He's our mediator. He's the one that brings comfort, no matter what we're going through, not just as an observer, but as a participant. He deeply understands and cares for us, and he's fighting for us. Another word that he could use here is this idea of helper. This is the idea that I wish Shelley, she could come home with us and give us advice as we were walking through the season. This is what he said, is that Jesus says, I will never leave you, that I will be with you. John 14, verses 15 and following. If you love me, keep my commands, and my Father will send, and ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate, a counselor, a helper, to help you and be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him. But this is so cool. But you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I'm not going to leave you abandoned. I'm not going to leave you and not have a place to go. I will come to you. It's the story of Christmas. It's the incarnation. It's Emmanuel, God with us, but it is in this way that is so wonderful. Because here's a counselor. A counselor can know what's going on around you, but he or she can't know what's going on inside of you. And the Comforter not only knows what's happening around you, but he knows what's happening in you all the time. He's also an advisor. He's not someone that will just be with you and console you when you're in your place of sorrow, but he will make you stronger in the face of whatever opposition you're facing with. He is one that will speak directly into your life. James chapter 1, verse 5, it says, if anyone lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. The Spirit, Jesus in us, directs us. He gives us a way to live our lives. It's not the passive counselor that consoles you, but will actually stand in the place and give you and direct you to give you a way out. And then the word that seems here that it totally catches you off, and the word that the NIV uses and others, is this idea, apparently, is an advocate. Man, I love that. It's a counselor who will stand with you as your defense attorney, because the reality is we have an enemy of our soul that wants to do nothing but to destroy you. And he doesn't destroy you by the obvious ways. If that was there, we could stand up against it. He's sneaky and he's deceptive, and he comes in through the back door. Most of the time it's through the narrative of our mind of what we think. That's where the battleground usually takes place. I can't do this. I'm not worthy. I made too many mistakes in my life. I'm not worthy of his love. I'm not noticed. There's shame. I can never overcome this. And the accuser keeps saying that in different ways, in different times. And the wonderful counselor, the advocate, he's the one that's there saying, no, that's not true.
Amen.
He's the one that's standing and advocating for you and pleading for you on your behalf. I love what 1 John chapter 2 says. My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anyone does sin, which is all of us, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins. He's the one that took them on himself so that we could stand before God, not just as not guilty, but we can stand before God as righteous. And the Son is advocating for us on our behalf. He's the one that can stop that narrative in our mind. The worry, the fear, the anxiety, the doubt, the shame. He's the one that's standing there, defending us. You see, when life gets out of control, when we feel like we have little or no hope, when we're fumbling around in this dark room trying to grab on to something that looks familiar that we can hold on to be able to get some light and to get some footing, to be able to find some way out, remember that Jesus is called Wonderful Counselor. Listen to his voice. What is he saying? Follow his teachings, what he laid out in front of us. Surround yourself with men and women, children, friends, who are speaking truth into your life, that are pointing you to the ways of Jesus, the wonderful counselor. I've said this as long as I've been here, and I'm going to keep saying it until I leave, that he will not remove you from the situations. He may, but most of the time, he will bring light into the darkness of your situations. Remember that the greatest light in your life often comes through the places that were once the darkest. Surrender and be able to return to him. Remember Emmanuel, God with you. Wonderful Counselor. Today, I think, is one of those precious times that we come together as a church, because it's the first day of Advent. That we're preparing ourselves for the arrival of baby Jesus. Where heaven broke open and the angels came and they proclaimed that for unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. Those shepherds, those Jewish shepherds, had to know Isaiah's words. And his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He came. And so today, we're celebrating, we're preparing ourselves for the arrival, the Advent season of Jesus. But today, we also get to take communion, which made it all possible. And so today, as we take communion, we're going to pass the elements, and I'll ask for you to take both the bread, the bread, the cracker, and the cup, and just hold them until everyone has been served, and then we will eat together. But in this time of reflection, this is what I ask the Spirit of God to do, to speak to you during this time. Just as Isaiah called the people of Israel to this dual looking, this idea of looking back, I'm asking us now to reflect on Jesus' coming, his Advent season, coming into this world, and during this season, to position ourselves to be in a place to look back, to experience and remember his life, his death, and his resurrection. Because as we see how Jesus lived, it gives us the footprints and the footsteps to be able to walk in our lives today. So I'm calling us to look back and to reflect on him. But here's the second part that Isaiah did, is he also looked forward to the second Advent, the second time Jesus comes, where everything is going to be made right. And until that time comes, what are his promises for you? What are the things that God promised that you aren't believing? What are the things that keep running in that narrative of your mind that are against his promises? Take some time and ask him, what are his promises for you? So take some time looking back and looking forward. So Jesus, I pray that you will send your Spirit, the wonderful counselor, into our presence right now. Holy Spirit, I pray that you will help us to look back and to remember. Remember your arrival, that first Advent. Your life, your death, your resurrection, the teachings that you have given us. And as we look back, we also choose to look forward and ask your Spirit to come and reveal the promise that you have for our lives. so that we don't have to walk in a land of darkness and gloom, that we can hold on to your promise. So we invite you to come and speak to us now.